Welcome to Digital Health Talks. Each week, we meet with the healthcare leaders making an immeasurable difference in equity, access, and quality. Hear about what tech is worth investing in and what isn't as we focus on the innovations that deliver. Join Megan Antonelli, Janae Sharp, and Shahid Shah for a weekly no BS deep dive on what's really making an impact in healthcare.
Welcome to the Digital Health Talks podcast, where we explore the intersection of technology, innovation, and healthcare. Get ready to be inspired by our next guest, a trailblazer in the world of digital health and a passionate advocate for women's health innovation. We are thrilled to welcome Katie McMillan back to the show. She is the visionary CEO of Well-Made Health. With over 15 years experience in digital health strategy, product development, and communications, Katie has made a profound impact on the industry. As a startup advisor and a champion for women's health innovation, she has dedicated her career to empowering early to mid-stage health technology, femtech, and famtech companies to reach their full potential. But Katie's impact extends far beyond her work with individual companies. Through her monthly newsletter, The Evidence Edit, she delves into the science and results behind digital health solutions for women, providing invaluable insights, thought leadership to the industry at large. I look forward to getting it in my box every week. In today's episode, we focus on a critical and timely topic, women's health. Recent events have brought to light the urgent need to address the challenges and disparities faced by women in accessing comprehensive healthcare services. The attack on women's health and access by certain factions of the government has put the well-being of millions of women at risk. From attempts to restrict reproductive rights to the defunding of essential healthcare programs, these actions have far-reaching consequences that extend beyond individual choice and autonomy. They threaten the very foundation of gender equality and the right to quality and healthcare for all. At the same time, there are some bright spots. And as we do here on the Digital Health Talks podcast, we like to focus on the good things making a positive impact. And one good thing that will have far-reaching implications is the Biden's administrative executive order on advancing women's health research and innovation. Today, I'm talking about Katie about these issues and exploring the ways in which digital health can be leveraged to advance women's health equity in a time when it is so deeply needed. So join us as we envision a future where every woman has access to healthcare she needs and deserves. Get ready to be energized, educated, and inspired, as I have been, by Katie's passion, expertise, and unwavering commitment to advancing women's health through innovation. Let's give a warm welcome to Katie. Hi, Katie. Welcome back.
Hi, so good to see you, Megan. Always fun to
Good to
talk.
see you too. So we're here today, and there's been some good news around women's health. There's been a lot more attention to it lately, which is great to see, particularly maternal health and menopause and women's later stage health. But traditionally, and we've talked about this a lot at Node and other events that we've been to together, it's been underfunded and often overlooked. So you've been focused on this space in terms of women's health and femtech for a long time. What are some of the innovations you're seeing and developments in this space that you're excited about?
Yeah, so it's funny, like I started working in digital health over 10 years ago, but my public health degree was focused in maternal and child health. And I felt like I kind of put those interests aside for a while because of my passion for leveraging technology across healthcare. But then about 5 years ago, I started seeing so many companies coming out that were at the intersection of women's health and digital health. And I was like, this is the time I've been waiting for. So it's been really wonderful to see such growth in that area. Fem Health Insights just released their annual report, and it was great to see sort of a validation of what think that I've been noticing, which is this hockey stick growth in the amount of companies that are coming out to serve women's health needs. For example, like there was 200 companies that came out in 2020, and 5 years before that, there were 35 companies. So,
Wow.
And now there's over 1,400 that they're tracking. So that's all been really fun to see, just the incredible growth in the sphere itself. And we can see it across different things. So I think there's this general term of like femtech, but I've sort of broken it into the idea of like women's health innovation and femtech. And the women's health innovation stuff I see as more like the consumer product goods or medical devices or care models that are changing. And the femtech stuff I see more aligned with like the traditional digital health things that I would look at. So telehealth, connected devices, apps, et cetera. Um, I've been very intrigued lately by what the consumer product or the consumer health tech companies, I guess, are doing. So there's definitely niche companies that are looking at fertility issues, pregnancy, postpartum, menopause, et cetera. But what's intriguing and sort of the way that like Apple successfully launched their health records product and doing some of the things that they've done with the watch is that the products are so ubiquitous that like you have a very large sample size to collect data from, and B, a very large population to potentially serve. And so those companies are not trying to like just scrape a little piece of the market out for themselves. Like they already have a nice size in the market. And so then it's like, what good can they do with that? And so, for example, like Whoop put out a study about how they looked at women that wore the band while they were pregnant, and then they were able to retrospectively identify markers for preterm labor based upon when these women actually gave birth. And so I think that stuff is really interesting because it's not just a product for essentially the worried well, people that are trying to get 5% more steps during the day or lift 10 pounds more at the gym or something like that. It's actually like looking at potentially real clinical problems that you could solve or identify needs for intervention based upon things that are already commonly used. So I think that that's really fascinating.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting as you think about both. I'm reading Rebel Health, Susanna Fox book, so she talks about kind of the needs. There's a quadrant of needs within healthcare of unmet and then met and heard. And you hope that a lot of the innovation is coming around those folks that need it and where the problems are. And I think there's also a larger discussion happening across digital health around there's a lot of innovation out there. Who's going to pay for it? Is it a consumer product? Is it an employer? Are the employers going to pay for it? So what are you seeing in that market? I mean, I think often the barrier starts with funding and getting the right attention. But once you're there, these companies are struggling with finding who's going to pay for it. So what are you seeing in trends, and your newsletter obviously on evidence, and you've been focused on that. Where do you think that is coming to play, and how have you seen that develop?
Yeah, I think who pays for it, I think there's probably a graph to be made with how mature the company is. But I do think that in women's health, a lot of companies have been focused on consumers paying for things because women are so used to being like sidelined essentially. And while they need whole person care that relates to all of their human needs in addition to their reproductive health needs, oftentimes they're only seen as this small piece with just reproductive health needs. And so we've just naturally found ways to sort of like circumvent the existing system to get what we need. And so I think that consumer market has been pretty strong. From a health equity standpoint, it's kind of a problem because a lot of these services and devices, there's at-home fertility tracking devices that are $300, and that's not going to be a price point that can be comfortable for a lot of people to use, especially if it's something that you may only use for, say, 6 months or 12 months. I think that, as we've discussed before, like my interest is a lot in the evidence backing these devices. And so I think that while I have done some research on that, it's an area that needs a lot more light shined on it. And I think with more understanding, and this is an issue in digital health across the board, like there was an article I saw maybe in the last year about how most of the unicorn companies don't have science backing like their products. And so it's people like McMillan are doing great work on that, but we just need more light shined on that in women's health space. And then I think more of the reimbursement will come from payers. When people go to employers, I think like this is an ecosystem problem in general. Like employers are just bombarded with people with digital health solutions and they're just tired. And I think like they may have something already. And then it's also the issue of like having how many niche solutions do you have to provide to your employees, and like do they trust that? You know, years ago, Ovia was top employer solution and they were using it to women were using it to track like trying to get pregnant. And then they had the app for after they got pregnant, and you could see how your baby's growing over time. But the employers were getting data on who specifically was using it in the company. So then you could essentially get mommy tracked, which is a huge problem. And then B, like what you're doing within the apps, like they were able to see when you're having sexual activity and stuff. And so like
Right.
that stuff.
Stuff that even with security and privacy disclosures and guardrails in place, that you would necessarily feel comfortable sharing with your employer for sure.
Yeah.
Which
So
is always, I mean, again, it's a challenge. That's part of the employer pipeline challenge anyway, right? I mean, it's not unique to women's health, but for sure, some of these around fertility and that is particularly tough. Well, when it comes to the science, right? So the NIH is part of this, big $200 million research effort with ARPA-H, and they've committed $100 million to women's health. So where do you think, as you're looking at it, I know you've been working with some companies that are applying, where do you see these new funding streams going? And do you think that is going to be innovative digital health solutions for women?
Yeah, I think it's super, super exciting. I was thrilled when I saw the two announcements. And like with ARPA-H, I think there's plenty of people that have good ideas, and that sort of early stage of funding is so tough. And so the fact that their first round of funds that they're giving out are, I think, 3 million for the lower tier and up to 10 million for the next tier is a nice cushion for somebody to actually start a company, or for a company that has maybe done some initial product building to get that boost that they need to like take it to the next level. So I also would love to see some of that funding go towards studies as well. So you're building a product, and oftentimes people use convenient samples, the people that are close to you, to initially vet it. And then maybe you might find somebody that goes to your OBGYN practice or something like that to see if they can run a small study with that group of patients to start to validate things. And I think with that kind of funding, we can open that up to a much larger and more diverse population that will hopefully, we've discussed at other events, so much happening in AI and machine learning, and like we just need more data around women's specific data, I guess, in general. And so
For sure.
I think that funding will help with that as well. Also, I'd love to see some more like formative research. So the ARPA-H actually evaluates proposals on what they consider technical readiness scores, which is like a common federal terminology. But basically, a 1 is like bench science, and a 10 is like this has already gone to market, and maybe we're finding a new way to use it within the market. And so I'll be intrigued to see where things fall on that continuum between like the 1s to 10s. For example, like one woman I was speaking with about a potential ARPA-H proposal was very curious about diminished ovarian reserve. Like it was something that she had been diagnosed with when she was trying to start having children in her 30s. And they were basically like, you'll need assisted reproductive health if you're going to go forward with a child. But then kind of as a throwaway comment, it was, oh, and by the way, you might be at greater risk for osteoporosis and early cardiac diseases and these other kind of conditions or things that she may not actually have manifest for the next 20 years. And she was curious about whether or not, like, should I be doing anything? Like, should I be doing strength training or taking calcium or something like that? Like I'm 35. What do I need to do until I'm 55 when these problems may start showing up in my clinical history? And we spoke with a few sort of top reproductive endocrinologists and menopause specialists in the US to figure out whether or not like there could be a digital health solution to address this. And essentially we decided not to, because it's such a long period of time for somebody to engage with something to try, like if we figured out some sort of health coaching based upon this. But the other big takeaway that really kind of moved her away from pursuing that was that they just said it's really anecdotal evidence that we have right now. And we essentially outlined a study like on the phone call. We were like, oh, could we look at women that had been diagnosed with diminished ovarian reserve like 10 or 15 years ago, and then see in their like what are their comorbidities that they're diagnosed with later on, and can compare that to like a similar cohort, like a matched cohort. And they were like,
Yeah.
great, nobody's done that. And we were like, This seems like we have been exploring this topic for 5 minutes. You guys have been in this your entire career, and you're telling us that like nobody has done this before.
Right. And I mean, I think I just saw literally on LinkedIn, John Lee, who's out of Chicago, was talking about a similar story where it was like a patient came in with X, and they then looked it up to see how often was it. I think it was around pediatric kidney stones, actually, that there was an uptick, and I'm paraphrasing and remembering, which is not my strength. I'll blame perimenopause. But in terms of there was an uptick of kidney stones during COVID in children. And why was that? And I think what they ultimately discovered was that it was because people, it was such severe pain and they came in. So it wasn't so much that there were more, but that it was during COVID, it seemed like more because other people with less severe pain weren't coming to the ER. So, but those types of negative studies, I think when we talk about, negative results, when we talk about, the power of AI and data and this accessibility that we have, even as patients, let alone as physicians and researchers, we're going to realize the promise of some of this now, where some of the barriers don't require $100 million to do that research, but we can identify some of these problems. So that is exciting. In terms of, were there any other sort of significant trends in kind of what you were seeing in terms of the companies and organizations and innovations that were applying for the grant?
Yeah, so I spent a lot of time digging into like what all of this meant and like what the application process was like. And as part of the kickoff of the sprint, the ARPA-H and some of their partners basically allowed people to just dump their contact information into a form, and it populated a giant spreadsheet and everyone had access to it. And so there was, I mean, close to 2,000 people in there. And so I gave some time looking through it, trying to see what type of things, because you basically just put in like, what are the things that you're interested in? What do you want to solve? And so the ARPA-H Sprint specifically had certain topics. That they had 6 topics that they wanted people to particularly focus on. One of them is a wild card, so it's like you don't know what's going to come out of that. But their number one topic was women's health at home, and so I feel like that is a space that digital health is meant to play in. So I think there was some intriguing things there. Some of it's incremental growth on some of the things that we see right now with telehealth or at-home monitoring. So, for example, like during maternity with COVID, a lot of the normal visits that you would have when you would go in and see your provider, where they would do an ultrasound or a non-stress test or something like that in the clinic, they were having to figure out how to do that at home to women and their babies at significant risk. And so, like, I definitely saw some of those companies out there thinking about how to improve the quality of the products that they're delivering. There was some women that I spoke with that were interested in pursuing the topic around pain. So they're trying to figure out better measurements for women's pain, which you could argue why we need to have that in the first place. Like, we just believe people when they say they're in pain, but perhaps like with the existing opioid crisis, it is a good idea to find better ways to have some actual quantitative data on how people are experiencing pain and treat them appropriately. And yeah, I mean, people were all over the board. There was bench science researchers that were trying to connect with people that had developed actual products and brought them to market. And there were designers that wanted to help build the next at-home pelvic floor wand to help people with incontinence. And so there's really a
broad spectrum,
scope
yeah.
of probably anything in women's health somebody was interested in. And so I am anxiously awaiting what the announcements are going to be for the next round of funding. So.
Well, it's encouraging to see, and certainly there are a spectrum of various innovations that we need. And I mean, I'm excited about healthcare at home too. And we've been talking about it a lot lately at Health Impact and seeing where. And then they just released I think the AMA is looking at coding for RPM and things like that. And when you think about, we have our watches and we have our Oura rings and we have the various devices that we use to track our own health, but the idea of taking that a step further, particularly, I mean, women's health for sure, but then also with pediatrics. I mean, I think a lot, my sister just had a baby and it's so different now than when I did. Where they send them home with the respiratory tracker, the owl that goes on their foot. So they're really watching and being quite vigilant around these. Sometimes it's perhaps a little too much data. But it's also, it's great. I mean, because they get released from the hospital and they need that to have that kind of monitor and tool to be able to check those things is great. And there's just so much potential there. So it's exciting to see. Around as we look at government funding and where it comes from and then what's needed, do you have any insights? Maybe it's too early to say on the president's initiative, but maybe it's not, in terms of like how some of these organizations are looking to partner around kind of public and private partnership. There's some best practices out there or examples of ways that this has worked to accelerate the pipeline of new products in women's health?
Yeah, I have some hunches, I guess, but like you said, like some of it is yet to be seen. So, for example, there are some big companies that have come on as prime contractors to ARPA-H, and then there's some that seem like maybe they're more positioned to be supportive for the Women's Health Sprint, because ARPA-H is not just that, like they have a lot of other things that they're working on. And each of those companies have their own specific areas of expertise. So some of them are just packed with subject matter experts that can come in and advise people. So they have this niche OBGYN that does something maybe in minimally invasive gynecological surgery, and like, great, they can be the advisor for that company. There's people that are experts on statistical modeling and like software development. But then I think they've also done some very intriguing things, such as partner with VentureWell, which would help those companies with those go-to-market strategies. And I'm glad to see that, because I think often, and especially from like my days when I worked at Duke, researchers are the way that the model is built, especially in like academic medicine, is to just like continually chase the research dollars, and you need to be bringing in funding to like support your position in your lab. And you may have discovered something wonderful, especially some of the digital health researchers I used to work with, like they developed some great intervention, and then like the grant funding ends, and then they're just, the people are sad that those things go away and they don't get to use them anymore. And they're like, oh, well, I have to go for the next thing. And like there may be a year or two of lag in between with like the next round of money coming in. And so I see these like strategic decisions coming in where they're bringing in the research folks and the product folks and the business folks and the go-to-market folks. And I really love that, because I think that will hopefully set up more solutions for success of actually like being operationalized, which is what we really want to see in digital health.
Right. Yeah, I think that the funding is a great place to start, and then how it actually gets executed. And as you said, I mean, I think we see it on the private sector, sort of the pilots and death by pilot and partnership and stuff. So it has to sort of be sustained throughout the research and then commercialization. So we talked a little bit about kind of the AI and the buzz around that and machine learning. And when we look at women's health, given that there have been research gaps over the years, what role do you see kind of AI and machine learning? I know I just got involved in this Women in Gen AI group. It's not specific to healthcare, but a lot of what they're looking at is a lot of the content that it's reading wasn't written by women for women. And so the models are being trained, and does it propagate and continue to put forward sort of inherent biases? And it's of course not only true for women, it's true for all. But when we're looking at all of these new innovations, kind of collecting data, what do you see some of the potentials for these discoveries and innovations, and kind of where some of the data gaps might be filled?
Yeah, it's funny. Like I was thinking last week, I was on ChatGPT and I was trying to use it to streamline some research. So I found a piece that had 500 software as a medical device companies in it. And I was like, hey, ChatGPT, like, can you tell me which of these are serving women's health? And like, it was just like, like it didn't give me a good answer.
Does not compute.
Does not compute. And then they were like, two of these are tagged as obstetrics and gynecology. Like, is this what you're looking for? And I was like, okay, I guess I'll have to do this manually. And so I was like, well, that's a start. But then yesterday I started combing through that 500 company list, and I was like, there is more in here. Like there are these software as medical device companies that are using AI and machine learning to do things in like radiology and anesthesiology and endocrinology. And there's another one, oh, cancer as well. And so it's promising, I would say. Like we need to improve the existing data sets to train them on. Like, even though the FDA wants companies that are submitting drug data to have it differentiated by sex, it doesn't always happen that way. We don't always study how things affect women differently. Like, it may just say like, oh, 40% of the study population was women, but they didn't say they need a lower dose or the dose response was different based upon the women. So I think like it's promising and it needs more data. And I also wonder about like with the chat GPTs and the generative AIs, if there are women using these tools as much. Like, I was thinking when I was asking it these questions related to women's health, like what are the top consumer wearable companies that are doing things in women's health? Like, I knew more than what it was putting back at me. And so I was kind of using it to validate my own assumptions to make sure I wasn't missing something. And that's when I was like, okay, this is problematic. Like, if there's not enough people feeding the machine, then it's not going to have the
Right.
right information to send back. Like, you'd like to think that it could scrape the entire internet, but like,
Right. And
it
I,
doesn't seem like that's exactly
I
where
live in
we.
a house. I live in a house of boys who were very early adopters to ChatGPT, both for schoolwork and everything else that they need to do. But yet, in my circle of friends, perhaps they're not as early adopters. So it gets propagated just by the nature of where we exist in the circle of our lives, if you will. But it
Yeah.
is, I mean, I think there's hope for it. But around that, there's also obviously with the change healthcare breach and what's going on with Unite, and there's a lot more attention towards cybersecurity at the moment. And I think even with the legislative environment, these critical issues around privacy and women's health, and we talked about it a little bit. This is sensitive data and becoming more increasingly sensitive because of the world we live in. How much of what you're seeing in the tools and innovations that are coming are they taking that into account, particularly with AI and data collection and all of that?
Yeah. I mean, I think it really needs to be taken seriously, particularly in the current legislative environment. I co-wrote a piece for Stat News a little while ago about how the government was trying to put in additional protections around reproductive health data in the same way that they sort of separate your mental health record from the rest of your record so that it can't be used against you. The thesis for that was that they needed to go a step further than what was actually being suggested. And so, like, I think that's one component to it, is the legislation protection of that information. But the reality is, like, most women between the ages of 13 and 40 are probably using some type of period tracker app. And then within that, they may also be tracking their sexual activity if they're trying to use it as a way of natural family planning. And so, like, unfortunately, the impetus is really on those companies to leverage best practices, make sure that there's end-to-end data encryption, make sure that people have the ability to enter that information anonymously if they want to, or without creating an account potentially. Like, I think that's another thing, is like everything is so interwoven now that you use the same email address that it can easily be tracked across 100 different accounts that you have on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
And so I even at one point put together an article that was like, if you're crossing state lines for reproductive health care, like, this is what you need to protect your phone so that you can't have, like, these are all the things your phone's probably potentially tracking from a GPS or Bluetooth standpoint, and how to kind of lock it down if you were in that situation, how to protect
Yeah.
yourself. God
Oh,
forbid.
that's great. We'll have to put those in the resources for sure, both the Stat News article and that. Yeah, I mean, it's scary times, and it is both just in general with cybersecurity and healthcare information being such a high commodity.
Yeah.
But in terms of the privacy and what's there. And what's interesting as you look at generations in terms of their willingness to use technology and put that information out there, it seems like the younger generation might be having a little bit of a backlash. I've read a little bit about that, and I don't, backlash is probably too negative of a word, but they're becoming a little bit more sensitive to it. Whereas some of the older kids and older 20 somethings were less so. But as the time and the politics change, they respond to that. But then, in thinking about sort of the global, bigger environment, there has been a lot of kind of celebrity attention to women's health, right? I mean, from Christy Turlington a long time ago with her maternal health charity, but Oprah and Gwyneth Paltrow, as women go through stages, we like to call attention to those things. And so the celebrities now are bringing some valuable attention to women's health issues and kind of having those discussions happen. I think from a PR perspective or from a marketing perspective, again, also even as we talked about sort of employer versus the consumer product and the pipeline for some of these innovators, do you see some of the digital health innovators sort of leveraging that type of advocacy or doing their own PR? What are some of the kind of marketing and sales advice you give to some of your clients?
Yeah. I got one last point about our last question, and then I'll jump into
Oh,
that.
yeah.
Another thing that I suggest to people is to look at European companies for reproductive health trackers because of the additional coverage of GDPR. And I think that that legislation kind of protects your personal data a little bit better, even than what we allow in the United States. And I also just do education to women about the fact that consumer apps are not subject to HIPAA in the same way that their healthcare data is. And I think that's often comes to people as a surprise as well.
Right. That's really important for
So
sure.
two little helpful tips that I like to share with people. As to the celebrity stuff, it's super interesting. Earlier this morning, I was looking at Serena Williams' latest investments, and she is, I mean, I think there's two ways that celebrities kind of are used. Some is just for like shining the light and the advocacy piece. And like you said, like Christy Turlington with the Every Mother Counts has been able to build up like a nice sort of long-term NGO where she supports women around the world who have healthy childbirth. Serena has done a different model, which is like raising investment capital, using some of her own money, and then partnering with other investors to help fund the companies that she wants to see out in the world, which I think is really awesome. She's invested in like Juno Health, which is doing brick and mortar stuff in sort of underserved areas, so standing out clinics. She has invested in Hued, which tries to train medical providers on the bias that they may have personally and how they deliver healthcare and understanding of race and social economic status and how to combat that. And there was one other one I was looking at. Oh,
That's
and
super
Mommy. He's
interesting.
invested in Mommy also. So
Which one?
Mommy,
Oh,
MAHE,
uh-huh.
which is trying to help improve birth outcomes for Black women. So she doesn't specifically, or she doesn't only do things in healthcare. She's done other things in consumer product goods and companies as well. But I think that's been really fun and exciting to see. And I think like for those companies itself, it's always like good PR when somebody that people already know about invest in your company. And then it's like, oh, well, Serena Williams backed me. And Serena Williams had her own experiences, like harrowing experiences with childbirth. And so she
Right.
can also lend that personal story to the validation of why she thinks these companies are important.
Yeah,
I
and that's what's
think,
amazing. I mean, I think so much of innovation in healthcare does come from personal experience within the system, right? And particularly for her, she did have that experience, and it's an incredible story that someone at her level could still, face that, right? And so that's awesome, though. I didn't know that she was such an active investor. That's great to hear. Well, and that's another thing I wanted to sort of talk about a little bit. I mean, this is attention, it's funding, that's all good. What do you hope to see, right? So it's really good news. What do you hope that you're going to see as a result of these initiatives?
yeah, I think like I'm optimistic across the board. And as you said, like we all bring our personal experiences to the things that we're interested in. And so when I was trying to get pregnant, I was very interested in the fertility space. And then I had kids and I was very interested in the pregnancy and the immediate postpartum space. And now my kids are getting a little bit older. And I'm like in my late 30s, but I'm already starting to think about perimenopause. And so I'm paying more attention to that. But I also am very intrigued by what's happening in just diseases that affect women differently or disproportionately as well. And so I think that's often like a piece of the puzzle that's not really addressed. And I spend a lot of time looking at what companies are out there and reading the news and seeing what's happening. And I'm inherently like every week excited about something that I read about. And I think with the influx of the federal funding, especially the ARPA funding, because of the fact that is so focused on kind of next gen things, I'm excited about the things that I don't even know about yet, the things that I may not have even considered, even though I spent a lot of time thinking about this, because like my own brain can't possibly think about every issue within women's health and give it the depth and the time that it takes to problem solve all of these things. I mean, that's why we have people that are niche experts and spend their entire career studying something. And so I am just very excited to see what is coming
Yeah.
in the next few years.
It is exciting. And luckily, they have folks like you who are there to amplify the work that they're doing. And we often have female founders on the program to talk about the work that they're doing. So if you come across any that might want to come on the show, you should invite them. Connect me for sure, because we're always interested in amplifying their work. So, but this has been so great, and it is exciting to see. And I think it's just the tip of the iceberg, right? We're going to see a lot more innovation in this space as the attention and then value comes to it, right? And the evidence that's there when you do look at these sort of niche areas of need and start to innovate around them, that the value will come. So thank you so much, Katie, for joining us. Share with our audience how they can reach you.
I'm available by email at katie@wellmadehealth and on LinkedIn, Instagram. My website's wellmadehealth.com. And you can always find me through
Perfect.
that.
Yes, everybody should subscribe to her newsletter because it's great. There's always good stuff about women's health, but then also fashion tips every once in a while. I love it. All right. Thanks again, Katie. Thank you to our listeners for tuning in. Until next time, remember, innovation is a journey, not a destination. Keep pushing boundaries, challenging the status quo, and always keep the patient at the heart of everything you do. This is Megan Antonelli, and you're listening to the Digital Health Talks podcast, where we make an impact one episode at a time.
Thank you for joining us for this week's Health Impacts Digital Health Talk. Don't miss another podcast. Subscribe at digitalhealthtalks.com. And to join us at our next face-to-face event, visit healthimpactslive.com.